When my mother died, I thought the worst was behind me. I was wrong. At the reading of her will, I expected pain, but not humiliation. My stepfather sat smugly beside the lawyer, making dry remarks as if my grief was inconvenient. But the true blow came when the will was opened. My name wasn't even mentioned. Not once. I had cared for her in her final months. I had held her hand through chemo, bathed her, fed her, stayed awake through every long, painful night. Meanwhile, he, a man who entered our lives just 5 years ago, had already moved on, already thinking about what to do with the house, the car, the inheritance. Something didn't add up. And I wasn't about to let my mother's memory be rewritten. As I started digging, I found more than I bargained for: deleted letters, a changed signature, and whispers of coercion. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about truth. And about making sure the right story was finally heard. The room smelled like leather and dust. Not the comforting kind, the suffocating kind, the kind that clings to you and won't let go. I sat with my hands folded, trying to look composed, but my palms were sweating. The lawyer hadn't said a word yet. He was flipping through papers, slowly, deliberately. And next to him, with one leg crossed arrogantly over the other, was Greg. My stepfather. He looked like he was waiting for a tennis match to start. "Not the reading of my mother's will, you okay?" he asked, smirking, not even looking at me. "You look pale." I didn't answer. I couldn't trust my voice. My mother had been gone for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. And this man, who barely spoke to her when she was alive, who left the hospital after 10 minutes because the smell was depressing, was already dressed like a man on vacation. A navy suit, no tie, loafers without socks. The lawyer cleared his throat. "We'll begin." Greg sat up straighter. I braced myself. The will wasn't long. Just 4 pages. It started with formalities, legal phrases I couldn't absorb. I kept waiting to hear my name. Just my name. That was all I needed, but it didn't come. Instead, the lawyer read sentence after sentence, naming Greg as the sole beneficiary. The house, the bank account, the car. Even her jewelry. My throat closed. I couldn't breathe. I leaned forward. "I'm sorry, could you check that again?" The lawyer paused, looked uncomfortable. He adjusted his glasses and glanced at Greg, who was already grinning like he'd won a game. "It's correct," the lawyer said. "Your mother made a revision 3 months before her death. She appointed Mr. Lawrence, your stepfather, as the sole heir." "That's impossible," I whispered. Greg leaned toward me. "She said you were too emotional to handle responsibilities. Said you'd just waste it all on your little art projects." I stared at him, stunned. That wasn't true. That couldn't be true. "She didn't even talk like that," I said, my voice shaking. "She never used words like responsibilities." "That's your language." He shrugged. "Maybe she grew up a little." "Pity you didn't." The lawyer closed the folder. The meeting was over. I sat frozen as Greg stood and clapped the lawyer on the shoulder. "Always a pleasure, Martin. Let's do lunch soon." I watched them leave. My body felt disconnected from the chair I was sitting in. I wasn't just excluded. I was erased. Not one mention. Not even a photograph assigned to me. My mother had loved me. I knew that like I knew my own heartbeat. She wouldn't do this. Not unless she was forced. Not unless someone got to her when she was weak and scared and too sick to fight. I left the office in a daze. But as I walked down the street, one memory came back with sudden, blinding clarity: a notebook. My mother's old, red notebook. She kept it by her bed, always writing in it when she thought no one was watching. I had seen her tuck something inside it the night before she was admitted to the hospital, and Greg never mentioned it. It was still in the house. I was going to find it. And if there was even a shred of truth left to recover from this mess, that notebook was the key. but I had no idea what else was waiting for me in that house. Or how far Greg had gone to make sure no one ever heard what my mother really wanted. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I sat in my car outside the house I used to call home, watching the porch light flicker as if even the electricity was reluctant to be there. The windows were all dark, except for the upstairs bedroom. My mother's room. Or what used to be hers. I watched Greg's silhouette pass across the window, then disappear. He was comfortable. Settled. Like nothing in the world had shifted. Like the house, the furniture, her memory, all of it now belonged to him without question, but I remembered that notebook. I remembered the way she'd clutched it, how she'd slid it under her pillow the moment I walked in. It wasn't paranoia. It was protection. Around 2 a.m., I got out of the car and walked to the back gate. The spare key was still taped under the loose brick. I let myself in without making a sound. My mother's smell had already begun to vanish. Replaced by Greg's aftershave, his cologne, his expensive silence, the red notebook wasn't in the nightstand. Or under the bed. I checked her sewing basket, the closet floor, even inside her old handbags. Nothing, but then I opened the bottom drawer of the dresser. That's when I saw it, tucked between a pile of winter scarves and an old box of Christmas cards. There it was, the red leather cover frayed at the edges, one corner stained with tea. My throat tightened. I flipped it open. The entries were dated sporadically. Some were just lists. Others were thoughts, prayers, fragments of guilt or hope. But one entry stopped me cold. Dated exactly 3 months before she passed, the same day the lawyer said she revised the will. I don't understand why Greg keeps asking me to sign papers I don't remember discussing. He says it's about insurance, or the bank, but I don't feel right. I told him I'd rather wait until you're here. He said not to burden you with grown-up things. I hate when he says that. You're more grown-up than he'll ever be. My hands were shaking now. There was more. I'm afraid to ask him what's really going on. He's been angry lately, short-tempered. Not like before. He moves my things around, pretends he didn't. He took my jewelry to get cleaned but never brought it back. I don't trust him. I miss you. I didn't even realize I was crying until a tear dropped onto the page. She'd been scared. She knew something was wrong. And Greg had been trying to isolate her. Maybe even gaslight her. And now, he'd inherited everything. I flipped to the last few pages. One entry had been half ripped out. The remaining scrap of handwriting was crooked, rushed. A single word was visible, not. I heard a creak in the hallway. I froze, the door handle turned. I had no time to hide, the only option was to stand my ground. Greg stepped into the room, wearing nothing but pajama pants and that smug expression I'd come to hate. Well, he said. Look who decided to break and enter. I could call the police, I said, holding up the notebook. Or better yet, you could explain why my mother wrote this just before she supposedly changed her will. He looked at the notebook and laughed. That thing? You really think a diary is going to hold up in court? It's not just a diary, I said. It's her voice. And I'm going to make sure it's heard. He stepped closer, eyes narrowing. Be careful, sweetheart. You're grieving. People make dangerous choices when they're emotional. That word again, emotional. His favorite excuse for dismissing me. But I wasn't the emotional one anymore. I was the angry one. The focused one. And the daughter of a woman whose last words may have been deliberately silenced. I didn't sleep that night. I drove straight to my best friend Lara's apartment. She was a paralegal, sharp as hell, and owed me about 10 favors. I handed her the notebook without saying a word. She started reading. After 10 minutes, she looked up and said, "If this is what I think it is, he's in trouble. Serious trouble. But we need more. We need to find the original version of the will." The one before the revision. And that's when it hit me, my mother had once given me a flash drive. Years ago. She told me it was for safekeeping. I thought it was old photos or recipes. I'd thrown it in a drawer and forgotten about it. That flash drive was what I suddenly hoped it was. I wasn't just going to prove Greg was a liar, I was going to burn his whole story to the ground. He was buried under a tangle of phone chargers, expired makeup, and an old birthday card from a boyfriend I barely remembered. The flash drive. Small, silver, nondescript. I turned it over in my hand like it might suddenly speak to me. But I already knew what it was. My mother had handed it to me a year ago, during one of our late-night talks after her first chemo session. She said, "Just keep this. In case anything ever gets strange." At the time, I thought it was paranoia. Chemo brain. Now I realized it was foresight. Laura plugged it into her laptop while I paced the room. She scrolled through the contents, a folder labeled letters, another labeled legal, and then a Word document named will_draft_preliminary. She opened it. My breath caught in my throat. There it was, a full draft of her original will, clearly dated 7 months before she died. And in this version, everything was split. 50% to me, 25% to a cancer research fund she'd supported for years, and the remaining 25% to Greg, in gratitude for his companionship and care. That was the mother I remembered. Fair. Sentimental. Thoughtful. Laura looked up at me. This version was never filed officially. But if we can prove she never willingly changed it, we have a case. But how do we prove coercion? I asked. That's the hard part, she said. Unless there's something else. A video, a note. A signature comparison maybe. I thought back to the notebook. My mother's handwriting was so distinct, always a little slanted, always with soft loops on her Y's. But the will we saw at the lawyer's office looked stiff. Like someone trying to imitate her. I pulled out my phone and zoomed in on a photo I'd secretly taken of the signature page at the office. Laura brought up a scanned letter from the flash drive, one my mom had written to her best friend 2 years earlier. The difference in signatures was obvious. This looks forged, Laura said, jaw tightening. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt nauseous. I sat down and stared at the screen. My mother had known something was wrong. She'd tried to leave a trail. And I had walked right past every sign until it was almost too late that afternoon. I drove back to the house. Not to see Greg, but to dig deeper. If he forged her signature, if he manipulated the lawyer, then maybe there were more pieces. Maybe someone else had seen something. And I knew where to start. The hospice nurse, her name was Vanessa. I remembered her kind eyes and the way she used to sit on the edge of my mother's bed and talk to her like an equal, not a patient. I found her number in an old group chat we had during the last month of my mom's life. When she answered, I introduced myself, then got right to the point. Did my mom ever mention being pressured into signing anything? Silence. Then, can we talk in person? We met the next morning at a cafe by the river. She looked tired. Older than I remembered. But her hands were steady as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. She was scared, Vanessa said. Not of dying, of leaving you unprotected. She told you? She tried. But Greg was always hovering. He didn't like her talking to me when you weren't around. Once, she asked me to mail something for her. A letter. Said she didn't want it going through the house mail. I did. I never asked what was inside. Do you remember the address? Vanessa nodded. She made me memorize it. Said it was the only place that mattered. She scribbled it on a napkin. It was a P.O. box in a small town 2 hours away. The name beneath it made my skin prickle. It was my mother's maiden name. Elena Costa. She had a secret mailbox. One Greg didn't know about, whatever she sent there, letters, documents, maybe even a final confession, it was still waiting, but so was Greg. When I got back to my car, there was a note tucked under the windshield. It wasn't signed. No handwriting. Just printed in block letters, "Stop digging or you'll end up in the ground too." I didn't sleep the night I found the note. I sat on Laura's couch, watching the front door like it might explode inward. Every sound made me flinch. Every creak, every passing car. The words on that piece of paper replayed in my mind like a curse. "Stop digging or you'll end up in the ground too." I kept asking myself, how far would Greg go? Would he really hurt me to keep this buried? But fear didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the truth. The next morning, I drove to the small town where the P.O. box was registered. It was a long, quiet road surrounded by flat fields and the occasional roadside diner. The kind of place where secrets go to sleep. I parked across from the post office and waited until it opened. My heart beat faster with every step. I handed the clerk my mother's ID and the key she'd hidden in a locket years ago, which I found in her old jewelry box. For a moment, the clerk hesitated, then nodded and returned with a small stack of mail. He placed it in front of me without a word. There were 6 envelopes, all addressed to Elena Costa. Some were sealed, some looked like they had been returned unopened. But one stood out, a thick manila envelope, corners bent, slightly heavier than the others. My name was written on it in her handwriting. I opened it right there in the post office lobby, my hands trembling. Inside was a printed letter, a USB drive, and a handwritten note. "If you're reading this, something went wrong. Greg was pushing me to change everything, my accounts, my will, even what I told the doctors. I didn't trust him. I tried to keep copies of everything. The lawyer he hired isn't the one I originally met. I think the will he filed was changed. I've included my last real wishes on the USB. I hope it's not too late." It felt like her voice was reaching through time, through death, begging me not to let this be the end of her story. I took the envelope and drove straight back to Laura. We plugged in the drive. There was a video. My mother was seated in her bedroom, pale but sharp-eyed. She spoke directly to the camera. "I'm making this recording because I don't trust the legal process anymore," she said. "Greg's behavior has changed. I feel pressured. I want it on record. I do not wish for Greg to be my sole heir. My daughter has cared for me, stood by me. She deserves to be protected. This is my truth, unfiltered, and if something happens to me, please, believe this over anything else." I watched it twice before I could even breathe. This was it. This was everything we needed. Laura sat back, speechless. Then she said, "We need to file for a petition immediately. Present this to a judge. If the original will was tampered with, and this video confirms coercion, Greg could be charged. Fraud, forgery, maybe more. Would the lawyer be involved too? Only if he knew. But something tells me he wasn't in the dark." I couldn't wait. I drove back to Martin's office, the lawyer Greg had hired, and demanded a meeting. I didn't call ahead. I didn't give him time to prepare. He opened the door in a state of surprise, or maybe guilt. "I have questions," I said, walking past him into his office. He shut the door. "You should leave, Miss Costa." "That's funny," I said. "Because I just came from a federal post office holding a letter written by my mother, confirming you filed a forged will." He paled. "Sat down. You don't know what you're doing," he said quietly. "You're poking a very dangerous man. Then maybe you should tell me what he threatened you with." He looked down. "It wasn't a threat. It was an offer. He said your mother wanted everything simple. That the revision was her dying wish." I asked questions, but he always had an answer. I should have known better. "You're going to testify," I said. He nodded slowly. "If it goes to court, yes. I will." But court wasn't the only place this was headed. I had a plan. I wanted people to see the video. To hear my mother's voice. To understand how quietly a life can be stolen, not with violence, but with lies and paper trails. That night, Laura helped me upload the video anonymously to a secure site. We also sent it to 3 journalists who specialized in elder abuse and estate fraud. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was public. The next morning, I woke to a dozen missed calls from Greg. I didn't answer, but I did check my inbox. There was a new email. No subject line. No signature. Just a message, "You just made your last mistake." I didn't go home after I read Greg's email. I went straight to the police station. Laura had insisted on it. "You've got evidence, you've got motive, and now you've got threats. You can't afford to wait." I sat under the harsh fluorescent lights of the precinct while a young officer took my statement. I showed him the email, the forged will, the original video, the entries in the red notebook. He listened, nodding, occasionally asking clarifying questions. But it wasn't until I handed over the flash drive that his expression changed. "I'll need to speak to the fraud unit," he said. "And possibly protective services. This isn't just a dispute. This is criminal." I asked him what would happen next. "If the evidence checks out, Greg Lawrence is going to be investigated for fraud, forgery, and possibly elder abuse. And if your lawyer corroborates this, he could be disbarred too." I left the station with a case number and the faintest flicker of something I hadn't felt in weeks, hope. But Greg wasn't done. That night, someone broke into Laura's apartment. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was vandalized. But every drawer had been opened, every closet ransacked. Like they were searching for something we hadn't turned over yet. Called the police again, filed another report. Laura moved in with her sister. I stayed in a hotel under a fake name. Still, I felt him everywhere. His entitlement. His anger. The echo of his threats. But here's what he didn't count on: people cared. The journalists we contacted had started digging. One of them, a woman named Camille who'd lost her own mother to a similar manipulation, published an article titled "Silenced at the End: How One Daughter Fought to Restore Her Mother's Voice." It included clips from the video, expert opinions on signature forgery, and a deep dive into Greg's history, including a suspicious legal battle with his previous wife's family. Within 48 hours, it went viral. Comments flooded in. People sharing their own stories. People demanding justice. Strangers offering help, lawyers volunteering time. My mother's voice was finally louder than Greg's lies. When Greg made his final mistake, he filed a defamation lawsuit against me. He thought it would scare me into silence, but it gave us access to Discovery, and Discovery gave us his emails. Laura's firm uncovered a string of messages between Greg and a digital forensics contractor. They discussed modifying metadata, forging PDF timestamps, even altering scanned documents. It was all there. Dated. Traced. Verifiable. The defamation suit collapsed overnight. Greg was arrested 3 days later. Fraud. Forgery. Intent to deceive a probate court. It wasn't dramatic, no handcuffs in the rain. Just 2 detectives and a quiet exit through the back of his office, but the trial was anything but quiet. Martin, the lawyer, testified under oath that he'd been pressured and deceived, but eventually admitted to willful negligence. He lost his license. Greg lost everything. The court reinstated my mother's original will. The house, the accounts, even her charitable donation were honored as she intended. But most importantly, her name, her memory, they were cleared. After the verdict, I stood outside the courthouse while reporters shouted questions. Do you feel vindicated? Was it worth the risk? Is there anything you want to say to Greg? I didn't speak to them. I looked at the sky, at the streak of light cutting through the gray clouds, and I thought of the last entry she ever wrote in that red notebook. The one I hadn't read until the trial was over. I hope she remembers that I loved her, even when I was too tired to say it out loud. I hope she forgives me for the silence I left behind. I did, because I hurt her. Every word. Every warning. Every act of quiet resistance she left behind for me to find. Greg tried to erase me. But in the end, he only exposed himself, and my mother's voice, it was never silenced. It was waiting.